You know, the funny thing about life is that not everyone is going to like you. No matter how much positivity you put out into the world, how much good you might do, some people are just going to find an issue with it. They might hate the way that you walk, the way that you talk, the way that you dress. If they're really about that hate in life, it probably doesn't take much to set them off. Enter Wolverine's #1 hater, Victor Creed, better known as the mutant Sabretooth. Despite being best known these days as Wolverine's arch-nemesis, you might be surprised to learn that Sabretooth was designed for and debuted in the pages of Iron Fist in 1977, which at the time was being written by Chris Claremont, who had recently started his legendary 16-year run on Uncanny X-Men. Victor's childhood wasn't very good. His mutation kicked in right as his brother was taunting him about getting a slice of pie, which unfortunately ended in the death of said brother. His father, believing him a demon, locked him in a cellar for most of his childhood and adolescence, forcibly pulling out Victor's fangs, though they quickly regrew, no doubt as part of his mutation. Victor was able to break free and went on to murder his father and presumably his mother. Victor also had a younger brother, Saul, whom he'd beat mercilessly on his birthday. Saul and their sister Clara eventually run off and get involved with a circus that just so happened to have gotten a new attraction, a young man named Logan, who had just recently developed his mutation as well. Things involving Mr. Sinister happen, and long story short, Saul ends up dead. When Sabretooth and Logan start regularly crossing paths years later, he tracks down Logan on his birthday every year to kick his ass, saying that by Logan being responsible for Saul's death, he gets to inherit the annual tradition instead. Victor himself has a pretty similar mutation to Wolverine. He doesn't have bone claws, but he does have razor-sharp claws all the same, as well as a healing factor similar to Wolverine's, that heals wounds far faster than most other people. This also slows down his aging process. Like Logan, he was born sometime in the late 19th century, but his mutation keeps his body in its physical prime. At one point, Sabretooth was approached by Charles Xavier when first recruiting mutants for the team that would become the X-Men, but Sabretooth declined. Violently. Xavier was able to subdue him and erase his memory of their meeting, though. This would establish Sabretooth's reasons for operating the way he does, though. He decided that if the world was going to see him as a monster, he may as well give them one. While he has a massive body count and frequently gives in to animalistic urges, there's some self-loathing deep down in there. He knows full well that the world would be a better place without him, but the only way he knows to deal with all of the trauma and suffering he's endured is to inflict it upon others. With just about every opportunity he's gotten for some kind of redemption, he's gone out of his way to reject it. Though very few in number, he does have a handful of soft spots and people he does genuinely care about, however. While he told the world that he murdered his mother alongside his father, in truth, he not only spared her, but took care of her financially and made sure she wanted for nothing, even visiting her at every opportunity he could. While he can give off the impression of only being a violent brute, Victor's actually pretty calculating, and at any given moment could be devising a way to manipulate a situation to turn completely in his favor, making him a dangerous person to underestimate. While all of these traits make Sabretooth a nightmare for anyone unlucky enough to encounter him, it also makes him a fantastic choice for a fighting game series like Marvel vs. Capcom. Sabretooth would debut as a playable character in the first Versus series game, X-Men vs. Street Fighter. Naturally, when looking at his moves, your first point of comparison is likely going to be Wolverine, and there's some intentional parallels made. While Wolverine tends to have quicker multi-hitting moves utilizing his claws, Sabretooth has slower single strikes utilizing his own, though they're performed similar ways sometimes. Sabretooth's voice actor in the Versus games is the late Don Franks, reprising his role as Sabretooth from X-Men the Animated Series. He'd also reprised the role again for Sabretooth's appearance in the Mutant Academy games. He's perhaps best known for at least an animation for voicing Dr. Claw and Inspector Gadget. He's had a pretty illustrious film and music career as well. You might not be too familiar with his voice acting roles outside of those two characters, but I guarantee that you've heard his daughter's voice at least once in your life. He's the father of Cree Summer, and if I were to go into every voice acting role she's ever done, this video would be like 5 hours long at minimum. She's a true legend of the game, to put it lightly. Sabretooth has two versus games to talk about here, both with some interesting stuff to highlight, so without any further ado. As I mentioned earlier, Sabretooth has some minute similarities to Wolverine, but if Wolverine is a finely sharpened katana, Sabretooth is a sledgehammer with some box cutters duct taped to it for good measure. He's nowhere near as mobile as Wolverine, but does have some unique ways to move around and get stuff out on the screen that Wolverine lacks. He's also one of the taller characters in the game, so he's a lot more susceptible to infinite combos that are either height dependent or are easier in taller characters, like Rogue's Dive Kick Infinite. Sabretooth's theme in this game was composed by Yuko Takahara. This one might honestly be the most interesting theme in the game, just in terms of tone, since it has a jazzy, almost casino-esque feel to it. It's a little odd for him, but I don't think it's entirely unfitting considering the specific comics the development team seemed to draw from for his portrayal in this game. More on that later. Sabretooth, like Wolverine, also has the ability to wall jump, done by pressing forward when in the corner and against the wall. Sabretooth's first special move is Berserker Claw, done with a quarter circle forward and punch, the punch strength determining the distance Sabretooth travels. Sabretooth's second move is Wild Fang, done with a half circle back motion and punch. This one's a leaping hit grab, which means it can be blocked. If you're caught by it, however, Sabretooth slams the opponent into the ground face first. The arc Sabretooth jumps at is dependent on which punch button you press, and if done successfully, Sabretooth can get an OTG pickup after it into a full combo. Sabretooth's third special move is probably his most recognizable, Armed Birdie, done with a half circle back and kick motion. Birdie comes out and fires off some shots, with the angle they come out at depending on the kick strength. Light Kick has her aim slightly downwards. Medium Kick has her aim straight ahead. And Heavy Punch aims slightly upwards. This gives Sabretooth a way to establish some kind of screen control, though it's best done after a hard knockdown, since Birdie takes some time to come out, and if Sabretooth is hit at any point while summoning her or while she's out, she disappears instantly. We'll get into Birdie's whole deal a little later on. Sabretooth's first hyper combo is Berserker Claw X, done with a quarter circle forward and 2 punches. Sabretooth does his Berserker Claw attack multiple times in quick succession, ending with an X-shaped slash to finish it, similar to Wolverine's Berserker Barrage X. Sabretooth dashes across the screen relatively fast, so this works as a good punish tool if you're quick on the draw. He's wide open if it whiffs though, so keep that in mind. His second hyper combo is also similar to one of Wolverine's, Weapon X Dash, done with a Dragon Punch and 2 punches. Sabretooth leaps up similar to his Wild Fang attack, but if he catches an opponent upon landing, he does a devastating auto combo that finishes up with an X-shaped slash. This one's a little trickier to consistently land, but is the one you generally want to use the most thanks to its insane damage. Sabretooth's final hyper combo is Hyper Armed Birdie, done with a half circle back and 2 kicks. Birdie comes out and instead of shooting just 3 bullets, instead dumps a whole load of them into the opponent rapidly. This does decent chip damage, but the real utility of it is that Sabretooth can act a second or two before the move ends, allowing him to set up a mix-up, or even combo into another super altogether if they were caught in this one. Sabretooth generally tends to be placed on the upper end of X-Men vs Street Fighter tier lists. X-Men vs Street Fighter is a scary-ass game, since the entire cast has access to all kinds of messed up infinites and touch of death combos depending on the game revision. Sabretooth in particular has a comparatively easy infinite, done by looping Jumping Medium Punch, Jumping Heavy Punch, and Jumping Heavy Kick into itself. Here are Sabretooth's colors in the arcade version. And here's his exclusive additional colors in the Sega Saturn port of the game. And here's his ending. Sabretooth has been around in comics for a pretty long while, so naturally, there's quite a few comics I can recommend to get a feel for him. He had a pretty decent solo series in 2022 written by Victor Laval, and that series got a sequel in the form of Sabretooth and the Exiles, also penned by Laval. Speaking of the Exiles, the alternate version of him from the Age of Apocalypse event was a pretty interesting character to follow since he was closer to being heroic there, though he still hated Wolverine. That version of Sabretooth went on to join the Exiles led by Blink from the same Age of Apocalypse reality as well. I mentioned Sabretooth's little birthday tradition earlier, and one neat comic revolving around that is issue 10 of the second volume of Wolverine solo series. This story, titled 24 Hours, takes place on Wolverine's birthday and bounces between the past and present. But if I had to recommend a specific Sabretooth story, I think I'd have to go with the series that had the biggest influence on how Capcom would end up handling the character in the Versus games. This video's comic book recommendation is the 4-issue Sabretooth Death Hunt miniseries by Larry Hama and Mark Texiera. Sabretooth and Birdie have a complicated relationship. Birdie's a mutant telepath who uniquely has the ability to enter a person's mind and sift through their memories, organizing them however she wants to. Sabretooth keeps her around, as she can go through his mind and push all of his negative traumatic memories to the back of his mind, allowing his more cunning character traits to come to the forefront instead of his animalistic rage. Sabretooth calls this ability the glow for the warm feeling he tends to get from the process and comes to depend on it, almost like a drug. You'd think Birdie being so important would shield her from some of Sabretooth's more violent outbursts, but nope, same old abusive Victor here. Sabretooth gets abducted by a mysterious task force who implants a bomb in his body and task him with an assassination order. He's to kill the target in 48 hours or the bomb inside him will go off. The target of this order turns out to be none other than Mystique. Sabretooth accepts the order and lets his captors know that as soon as he kills her, he's coming for them next. Birdie and Sabretooth track her down to Paris, where Mystique taunts him with information that only one other person, a former Flame named Lenny Zauber from his time as a Weapon X operative, would have known. As it turns out, Lenny was Mystique the entire time, and she drops a bombshell on Sabretooth. Not only does she know who kidnapped him and contracted the hit out on her, she reveals that it's she and Sabretooth's own son, Graydon Creed. Mystique gave him up for adoption shortly after his birth, and while he's not a mutant, she figures he wants revenge on both of his parents. Oh, and Wolverine's here too, because it was the 90s and putting Wolverine in your book meant instant sales. Sabretooth and Birdie track him down to his office building in New York where he confronts him. Creed ends up letting him live for reasons I won't spoil though. It's a short, sweet story with some fantastic interior art from Mark Texiera. The comic book artist, that is, not the former Yankees first baseman of the same name. There's a neat little line in the story where Sabretooth muses that he'd sooner want Wolverine for a son than Graydon, which is funny considering Chris Claremont's original intention for Sabretooth was for him to be Wolverine's estranged father. This didn't end up happening in the main Marvel continuity, though the alternate universe book X-Men Forever, also written by Claremont, ended up following through on that plot thread. Birdie doesn't end up surviving this story, but during the Krakoa era of X-Men, she was finally resurrected. This story's brisk, but it gets across what Sabretooth's about, and more importantly, shows us firsthand some of the influences Capcom took for Sabretooth's Versus series appearances. Pretty much everything, from his overcoat to Birdie in her entirety, is taken directly from this era of Sabretooth. Hell, even the car in one of his victory poses seems loosely inspired by the one driven by Birdie in the car chase sequence from Death Hunt's second issue. It's not an especially huge time suck or anything, so definitely give it a read if you want some quick, no-frills Sabretooth action. Sabretooth returned to the series again in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, though a lot more toned down from X-Men vs. Street Fighter. Most of his moves are essentially the same, even considering the loss of medium buttons. The only real major change is Birdie losing one of her angled variants. The most important one, the one that shoots straight forward, is still available though. Sabretooth's Team Hyper combo with his expansion assist is renamed Hyper Berserker Claw, which sounds like it'd be different, but it's functionally identical to his Berserker Claw X Hyper combo. That's not to say Sabretooth still doesn't have some silliness to take advantage of in Marvel 2 though. The fun thing about that game is that even the lower tiers have some bullshit that can be exploited if you're dedicated enough to learn it. Sabretooth, for example, has an infinite that's Sentinel specific. It's similar to his old infinite from the previous game. The funniest thing Sabretooth can do, though, revolves around Birdie. If you have a bunch of meters stocked up, Sabretooth is the last surviving member of his team and managed to get a straight hit with Birdie and are using anything but his Berserker Claw assist, there's a glitch he can take advantage of. Simply summon Birdie, and if one of her bullets lands a hit, immediately press both assist buttons to initiate Birdie's hyper combo, which in this instance will come out even though the other Birdie is still on screen. As long as you have the meter, Sabretooth can instantly do this to summon Birdie again as soon as the hyper combo background disappears. Because it disappears a bit before Birdie leaves, it gives you enough time to summon her quick enough that the next volley of bullets will combo from the last one. This can be a near to complete touch of death depending on the characters involved. Sabretooth's first assist is Berserker Claw. His second assist is Armed Birdie. His last assist is his launcher. And here are Sabretooth's colors. Wherever Wolverine goes, Sabretooth is sure to eventually follow, and I'm glad that eventually happened with Capcom's Marvel fighters as well. I think it's especially neat that so much of his depiction in the series can be traced to a specific story, especially when so many of the characters in the series tend to be combinations of their animated series and comic counterparts. Sabretooth, being such a well-known X-Men villain, tends to show up in other X-Men related things. Off the top of my head, he's a boss in X-Men Legends and X-Men Origins Wolverine, a playable character in X-Men Mutant Academy 2 and X-Men Next Dimension, and I'd be absolutely shocked if he doesn't show up in Insomniac's Wolverine game. Wolverine and Sabretooth have one of the most legendary comic book rivalries ever, and I'm glad to see the Versus games be one of the many video game series to allow players to act it out. That said, that's going to do it for this video. As always, thanks for watching, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.